Cool.
All
All
right.
right. All right. Happy Sunday, guys. This is another dog talk with Canine Freedom, and we have here is my good friend Jayne. Fine. Blah. Wow. I really suck at that. Oh my god. I
Just
hate the
rushing
I
through.
I just hate the intros. I'm just like, this is why I'm not good. I will not be good at podcasts just because of all this. That's why I need someone to help me out with that, but that's totally fine. But anywho, this is my good friend Jayne, and we've had a we had quite a history together. We went to the same school, which is Bergen University, and after that, Jayne has helped me through several years of being at my social classes, and we became best friends after that. And she moved from California to back to the East Coast, which I was very sad. But she's uh, she's she's gonna talk to us about her dog Arlo. But I figured, Jayne, you can go ahead and just talk to us about where you're at right now, and
Yeah.
businesses, and or what you're doing and where you're at.
Yeah, perfect. I'm so excited to finally be on one of these. It's like Kevin had mentioned, we're very, very good friends. He's probably one of my best friends in the canine industry for sure. And it's so funny it took me till now to get on it, but it aligned well. We didn't actually plan for it to happen right after Hannelor's talk, but it aligned really well that we just talked. He just talked so much about service dogs on the last one. So currently, as Kevin had mentioned, we went through Bergen University together. We went through the Bachelor's of Science degree program together. And currently I am working in Cary, North Carolina as a trainer. So I do some for fun classes, like I'm just starting a new nose work class, which I'm super excited about. Some like tricks classes and obedience classes. We're gonna get some intermediate classes started up here, which I'm really excited about. And I work for a facility called All Dogs Allowed, which is we basically do everything you could ever want under one roof. It's an awesome team. I love working there. And then the other thing I do a lot of is behavior modification work with All Dogs Allowed. And I am also launching my own business, which will be called Finest Minds. It's going to start out doing psychiatric service dog training is really where I'm going to specialize in the service dog niche. So there are other programs I know of that I think better serve people wanting to train for other things, but my own experience, where my heart lies is with psychiatric service dogs. And I'm going to go into that for sure in this. That's a lot of what this is going to be about. And then the company will also eventually open up into a broader wellness. So I recently decided I want to go to school to get some actual education and certification in mental health work for humans. And as I get sort of credentials in that, the company will expand is the idea. Sort of first wave will be largely service dog focused, educating trainers and mental health professionals on psychiatric service dogs from my own experience. And then we'll also include some pet dog stuff. So I really want to launch a course about mindfulness using walks, dog walking as a mindfulness exercise, because that has been huge in my own mental health journey, in sort of figuring out how to use training to better offset my own mental health journey. So nothing is up yet. My website isn't live yet. My Facebook page is out of date for my business. But if you are watching this and you're interested in that, any of those concepts, go ahead and shoot me a Facebook friend request. All of my big, like, this course is live or I'm offering this service now, will be sort of announced through my Facebook wall. And I'm hoping to get the ball rolling. Pre-launch is going to start basically ASAP. I finally got the money that I needed for like making my LLC and getting my insurance. So I'm hoping to get that off the ground by second week of June. And then probably mid-June, late June, I'm hoping to start taking probably more clients on. Yeah, so I'm super excited about that. And in terms of like this live, I thought it would be kind of cool to go back in time a while from Kevin, before you knew me, and talk about how I actually became a trainer because my story starts, really my dog training journey story starts, I was 19 and I was at college. I was at Oberlin College. In my end of my freshman year, I started struggling more with depression, as a lot of college students do. It was, you know, like things like I would really struggle to wake up in the morning, or, you know, like sort of not mild symptoms, but not crippling symptoms yet. And then entering into my sophomore year, I started experiencing more difficulty, more social anxiety. I started really struggling to leave my room at all. Became really much harder for me, as one would imagine. That certainly impacted my grades and my social life. And I sort of struggled with it the whole year. And then towards the end of the year, in February of my sophomore year, I had a very bad horseback riding injury where I was thrown off and basically shattered this shoulder, and had to have surgery. And there's like a bunch of metal in there now. And that kind of finally put the press of like, it gave me an excuse other than my mental health to leave. And I really, for safety reasons, should not have been living alone at college. So I finally had to make the call to my dad, like literally 2 days after you no longer could recoup any cost on tuition, being like, you got to come get me because it's not safe for me to be living here anymore. And so after I came home, I basically became agoraphobic. So my parents at that point were living in New York City, and I was struggling to even leave the apartment. Like I would get really severe anxiety just stepping out of my door for any reason. And was really struggling to like go places, and most of my friendships were really struggling as well. And then sort of like by pure coincidence, and at this point I had thought my whole life I wanted to be a vet and realized I didn't want to be a vet, and I had really not a great idea of what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to work with horses because that's the only thing that had made me happy in like 2 years. But I'm nervous and horses don't respond great to that. And so I knew I really didn't know enough to work with them. So I was feeling like incredibly lost, struggling to leave my house for any reason. And then coincidentally, my family got a Boston Terrier puppy because we had lost our Boston Terrier a couple years before. I was home from school. We were like, spur of the moment, let's get this puppy. And wow, did we luck out. We didn't get her from a great breeder. We like literally looked on the internet, saw there was a Boston Terrier puppy being sold, like, it was like 100 within an hour radius was our criteria. Got this dog a day later. And it turned out that while she's not built very well, she's relatively healthy and she's just happy. Like she's a happy little dog. And she basically, Kevin's nodding, he knows Evie. She's never been bothered by anything a day in her life, except the one time she did find some methamphetamines once when we were like at the lake. That's the only time she's been afraid of anything, and that's fair. And basically this dog was like, hey, how are you? You want to come out for walks with me? Like it didn't bother her that my body was telling her we were going to die. She wasn't afraid of people. She was really, in fact, she's very social with people, very social with other dogs. And I didn't know a ton about dog training, but I knew enough to know I had to get her out. And so it was like a reason to leave my house. And I know in her talk last week, Hannah was saying like service dogs save so many lives. And I think that's one of the reasons. Like that was one of the big things that opened my eyes to the value of, separate from service dogs, just the value of an animal connection. And even throughout at school, I think one of the reasons I survived that experience was because I had a pet rabbit named Millie, who I was like, well, I can't hurt myself. Like who would take care of Millie, And so slowly I kind of started digging deeper into dog training through the process of raising Evie, right? Like I took her to puppy class. I really enjoyed it. I took her to an intermediate obedience class. I really enjoyed that. We did a little bit of agility for fun. I was really loving that. And sort of slowly over time realized like, wow, this is something you like while you're still really struggling to leave your house and doing anything like without a dog. you feel better when you have Evie with you, and you're less stressed when you have her with you. It feels like you have an in kind of with the world. And then it was Westminster, I think it was Westminster 2015. So Westminster is a big dog show that happens in New York City every year. And I was like, you know what? I've been living at home for a year. When I got my first dog at 9 years old, I went to Westminster, and I was like, that would feel really cathartic. I'm going to go. And I grew up in New York City. I'm someone that's really never struggled to, like, it's never been an issue for me. If I wanted to do something, I could go do it. I've been independent, taking subways on my own since I was like 13, and I went to Westminster one day with my parents. They came the first day, and that was really fun. And then the second day I went, and about an hour in, I had one of the worst panic attacks I've ever had, where I actually was like, sometimes when you get to a certain level of panic, your brain just like turns off. And I basically was stuck in this, it was like these bleachers that looked out over this whole huge building. And all I could see was like a wall of people. And I was feeling dizzy. So I sat down, and I ended up unable to get up from that chair just to leave. Like, all I wanted to do was get up and leave. And I was stuck there for like 2 hours. And it just so happened that the place I was stuck in, about like 200 feet away from me, there was this booth with this woman. I don't know if she was like selling something. I can't really remember. Like, it was just where her dogs were. But there was this older lady with a rough collie service dog. It had like a red service dog vest on. And because I was stuck in this spot, I was like looking for things to try and get me out of it and get myself up to leave the building so I could go home. And I was watching this service dog was one of the things I was doing. And so I did that for like 2 hours until I could finally get myself up and leave. And I went home, and that was like a really big hit for me, that it felt like I had lost my freedom and my independence, that I couldn't handle like a dog show, a dog show that I'd gone to before. I couldn't even do that. So I was feeling really down about myself from that. But then I had sort of seen this service dog all day, and something that's always been true of me is like, if I don't know something, like if I don't know something about something, I'm like interested in learning more, right? And so like as a kid, I would always, it was a different pets or different aquariums. I kept aquariums, different species of fish. I'd be interested. I just learn about their care, just to know it. Maybe I would get them, maybe I wouldn't. And so I started doing some research on service dogs. And through that research, I found out that you can have service dogs for non-physical disabilities. At the time, in my head, it was like, you only had service dogs for like blindness. And I had vague ideas about service dogs for mobility problems. Mm-hmm. But I was finding out like, psychiatric service dogs are, they're starting to be a thing. And I was really interested in that concept. And it's something that I knew immediately. I was like, ooh, that would help me. I don't know exactly how. I don't know how to get there. But I know that would be something that might give me back some of this independence I felt like I'd lost. And I was sort of doing research to try and find a program, because I was reading all this about, you can train your own service dog, but it's very difficult. People were not very, I joined some online forums, and people were not very nice. They were kind of like, which can sometimes happen in the online service dog community. They were sort of like jaded, I think, and maybe needed to spend less time on those forums. But, and then I found some on Facebook, like I'd realized forums had kind of gone onto Facebook. So I started going down that route and like lurking on forums and kind of learning more at the same time as I was trying to find a program that I could get a fully trained dog. And I was just finding it was cost prohibitive, like, $20,000 for a trained dog that I certainly didn't have. I was going to have to pitch my parents on, and they weren't on board for it at that point. Fair enough, from the information I was giving them. And through the process of looking for a program, I found that Bergen existed, that the school was a thing. And I really, after like months and months of searching, I couldn't find any programs that placed for purely psychiatric that weren't veteran, for if you weren't a veteran, basically. And to this day, that is an extremely underserved section of the service dog community, that there really aren't very many programs you can get a fully trained dog from for psychiatric service that is, if you're not a veteran. And so that's one reason why I feel so called to help serve that community. So, you know, through this process, I was realizing, okay, well, I'm not getting a fully trained dog. That's not on the docket financially. I can't find a program anyways, even if I had the money. And I had Evie, who at the time I was like, well, you might be able to be a service dog. You know, she does have some things going for her. Like, she's very confident and she's not afraid, right? She's not sensitive to the environment. She has some stuff that, like, I see why I felt that way, but her big thing is that she cares more about strangers than me. Like, they're more fun. You know, I've worked really hard that I can get her attention if I ask for it, but still, like, you know, the first day of every group class I have, she's like, hi, do you want to be my friend at the end? Because that's what gives her the most joy. And so I did start training her for it. And then as I was training her and realized, oh, I really enjoy this, it finally occurred to me, like, maybe you would like being a dog trainer. That's something you might be able to do. And I remembered Bergen, and I knew I wanted to go back to school for a bachelor's degree of some kind. And so I sort of just started poking through Bergen. I think I talked to the admissions office, which I think is just Connie. And I ended up going out there with my dad to visit it. I loved the area. It's a beautiful area. I toured around a little bit. I actually met Carly, Kevin, our classmate. She was out exercising dogs. There was like 10 dogs out there. I was like, ooh, this is where I'm meant to be. And so I embarked on Bergen initially, really as like, yeah, I knew I would like being a dog trainer, but also because I knew that it would give me the knowledge to train my own service dog. And that's what I really wanted from it. And it did definitely give me a comprehensive service dog education in what to do and what not to do, from seeing a bunch of different programs, you know, not just Bergen, and also seeing different aspects of it, like, you know, matching puppy raisers to dogs or matching students to dogs. You know, there's a lot of parallel stuff that I learned from in sitting back and watching that. So that was a extremely valuable education in my mind, for someone who, like me, who eventually would like to start their own program for a community that I feel like there aren't a lot of programs that serve. And we also get, I mean, it's wonderful connections with different sections of the service dog world as well from that. So, and then through the process of Bergen, one of the connections I made was a breeder that he came with his dogs to show us some gun dog stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need a dog like that. Like, his dog, I think it was Solo he had with him, like, just such a cool dog. And then the dog I bonded with most at Bergen was sort of a similar type, like a field bred kind of lab, which is a really different personality than the typical, like, show bred or pet bred lab. Like, and I just was like, ooh, that seems like a cool dog. I'd like to have that dog. And my mom happened to come out and visit at the time and saw me with one of the Bergen dogs, who was just like a natural caretaker, this lovely golden retriever named Thomas. We took him to the farmer's market, and she finally saw what I'd been trying to tell her for years, which is that the difference between me with a dog and me without a dog is the difference between, I do feel like I'm going to faint and it's not super pleasant to be out in the world, but I can do it, versus like stuck on the bench, unable to get up because I feel like I'm going to pass out when I stand up, kind of. And so she got in my corner and convinced my father, like, yeah, Jayne needs a service dog. Evie's not going to cut it. And the timing happened to work out that there was a litter that the breeder had on the ground already that he was like, listen, I think that these puppies could make it. Looking back, I think I wish I'd gone slower in the process. I was so excited for the end product that I definitely rushed myself. And that's something I've learned from and something I will counsel people based on in the future. But I will say that Arlo is when I was a little girl and we were like, Jayne, you're getting your first dog. He is the picture in my head that I had. I always wanted a male black lab that was just like, he's like a Disney dog. I mean, at 4 years old, he's like a Disney dog. He wasn't as a puppy. Like this dog at 4, he's like basically will do anything I ask him. And it stresses, like he's very stressy. You know, it's a lot of stuff stresses him out, but not to the point he can't be a service dog. You know, he could be a service dog because I asked him to, kind of. He'll rise to the challenge. And the connection with this dog is just like, it feels like he reads my mind sometimes, you know, and he's wonderful. He's just a natural empath and very good at, most of his task work was shaped from natural alerts. So I know Hannelore mentioned a little bit about the tasks that her dog does, and she had mentioned alerts. And so some of the behaviors that Arlo is trained to do that are most helpful is anxiety alerts. So from the time he was a very young puppy, he connected the fact that when I covered my face, there was something wrong. And he would come over and he would just like shove his nose under my hand so that it flipped up and I was touching him, and then he'd go, pet me, you know? So from a very young puppy, he figured out how to do that. And he picked up on, I do a deep sigh when I'm anxious. Like when I'm really anxious, I'll be like, and he can be in a dead sleep across the room and he's up and in my face if I do that, you know, and that was mostly something he picked up on his own. And then there are a couple more formal behaviors. Like I trained initially it was that he would like bump my leg with his nose when I would bite my nails or bounce my leg. Those are behaviors I often will do if I'm like waiting in a line, would like really spin me out waiting in a line for anything. So I taught him to interrupt in that context, and he turned it into like, instead of a nose bump, because he would be sitting next to me, he would like put his little cheek against me. And then if I wasn't paying attention, he'd like press harder. Then if I still wasn't paying attention, he'd press harder and start climbing like a little weasel. So those are all like trained behaviors that started with just an empathetic dog that was in tune to his handler's emotions. And I sort of shaped into formal task behaviors, which is what makes a dog a service dog. Versus, you know, a dog that's just there for emotional support. That's not a service dog, right?
Right. Yeah. So like, Jayne, when you got Arlo as a puppy, and then, you know, you saw that he had qualities that he could be your service dog. Guess one of the questions that, you know, most people want to ask when they try to do something like this with their dogs, or want to pick a dog to be a service animal, like what age did you start like really doing all this, like all the training, and like how old was he when you first brought him out for like field trips and all that good stuff?
That's a couple of really good questions in one. So the first thing you kind of talked about was like different behaviors from a puppy that might make me say, ooh, this dog could be a service dog. So I'll talk about that first and Kevin's known Arlo since the beginning. And Arlo, I will say that this story ends with about a week ago, I finally announced publicly that Arlo will be taking an early retirement to go live with my parents. And from the time he was a puppy, Arlo has been a bit of a square peg in a round hole, you know, and I'm curious, Kevin, like, what was your reaction to hearing that Arlo was taking an early, were you sort of like, yeah.
Well, maybe I'll just tell you how I felt when you first got Arlo, and then we'll go from. Before
you say that, I'll describe a little bit about what the first couple of weeks with Arlo looked like. Now, knowing what I know now, I really wish that I had just sort of, I think No, honestly, I wouldn't change a thing looking back. I learned so much raising that dog about so much, but it wasn't because he was good, naturally good service prospect. It was because he wasn't. And now I'm happy with where I am, but I would have been much more successful in having a service dog if when I gotten him, I had had the emotional capacity to just go, nope, you got to go back. You're not going to work out. Because a couple of the first things I saw from Arlo as soon as I got him home was he was really environmentally sensitive. He was very environmentally sensitive. So any novelty in the environment, he had a big issue with. He really took time to get over. And that's one of the core traits that you look for in a service dog is the opposite of that, is that they're not environmentally sensitive, that they're environmentally confident. Novelty, another thing that he struggled with. New things, he was like, it's going to kill me until I'm proven otherwise. And he would get over things with time, not a crazy amount of time. Like he could get over it, but at first he was like, this is it. This is how I got to bark at it, right? He was super weird with other dogs from the time I got him as a puppy. I remember when he was 12 weeks old, I brought him to a puppy class and he met a bull terrier that was his size. And all the hackles along his back stood up. He did that really stiff stand he does where it's like he looks like a statue. His tail is literally the straightest I've ever seen. His like impression of a pit bull, basically. And he froze. The dog came up to him and he flipped it over, basically. He like lunged at the puppy and pinned it to the ground, which in a 12-week-old puppy is not, that's not something 12-week-old puppies typically do. That was very alarming behavior. And he was also super jeeved out by new people. Like he met my neighbor, Hannah, who was another Bergen alum at the time, was living with her then boyfriend, who's a big dude with a beard. And Arlo did not respond well when he met him the first time. My boss just arrived. I'm going to stick Evie outside for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
And then I want to hear your response now that I've explained who Arlo is.
yeah, go ahead. You're good. But yeah, guys. Basically, we're just gonna talk about her whole story. You know, just the process of what she went through with Arlo as her dog, and the struggles. Just because it's like she's not the only one that started off, trying to train her own service dog. So and I'll definitely tell you how Arlo was when I first met him, and that's him in the background.
He's got a really big bark. My boss is borrowing my Boston Terrier because she's so perfect. She's going to go on a field trip to teach a puppy.
Right. Okay. So when you first got him, and this was like when we were like just classmates at that time at Bergen, and we were just mutual. But I was just like, what the? It's like, really?
Yeah.
So we're getting a puppy as you get I don't know. I think you had Richmond at that time where you had somebody and then plus Evie, and I was just like, okay.
Seems like a lot, yeah.
I was like at first like, oh, she crazy. I'm like, she crazy to get the dog like a field line lab from like that was related to Han Solo or like just Solo
brother.
Yeah, Solo. Charlie.
Yeah, he wasn't related to Solo, but yeah, and Charlie was not. Let's just say Charlie did not stay in the program long, and when he left, it was not like, oh, bye. It was like, oh, he might be dangerous. Goodbye.
oh, poor Charlie. I was just like, what the heck, So, but like after that, I was just like, all right, you do you, and then like later, like after a year, we graduated. That's when I was just doing like started my large field socials, and that's when I think, was it before that or was it after the fact that we met up with our dogs?
Yeah, that was before the socials. It was like right before you started running the socials. We started because Kevin's got his dog Nova came to live with him like right when you graduated, and so that's when we started having them hang out. And shockingly, they are friends. Like that remains one of Arlo's best friends. Neither dog is great with other dogs, but they like each other. But
thank God, otherwise we were prepared for something that happened.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, and then you started running your socials, and I was like, I'm gonna try bringing him, and I thank God I did, because that opened my mind to a whole other way of training, one. And two, was so good for Arlo. He would not have been able to be a service dog without me having given him those experiences. And it was good to get other trainers, because through the socials, I got your eyes on him. I got Bella's eyes on him. I felt less like it was like me alone with this ill-fitted dog in service work, at least. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the fact that you were able to be involved and help out while he was there was always nice. And then you just had a feel for certain dogs that you were just like, okay, I'm gonna pull him out, and I was just like, that's fine, And of course, he started off a little rough, but he became just one of the dogs at that point that was like, all right, cool.
He actually did really pretty well in socials. I mean, he the only time he was a dog you had to watch is if there was like a scary dog who he would want. He was like, I want to beat the hell out of that guy. Like, there were a couple of dogs that came to social that would be like, hunched posture, tucked tails, and Arlo would try and stalk them the whole social to start a fight, basically.
I remembered.
Great.
I remember that made me want Bloody Marys after that, and I'm just
there were a couple socials that dogs came to where I had to be like, all right, Arlo's gonna hang out in his crate. But so and through the process of raising him, I learned a lot about, like, something looking back that I didn't have going in, but will be a central thing in the program that I'm launching, is if you're starting with a puppy, and this gets into your other question that you had there, if you're starting with a puppy, you can't just go, this is my service dog prospect. Like, I don't think that sets you up mentally for success. Because so you had asked there, when did I start training him? And Arlo is a little bit of a special case because, like I said, a lot of his core personality traits, I knew enough that they gave me pause, sort of. He's struggles with novelty. He was very creepy with, he really didn't like social pressure from people he didn't know. He was better with women, still not great as a puppy though, like still would take him a second to warm up to people. And part of it was that when I first got him, from 8 to 12 weeks, when I got him, I was really sick and I could barely leave the house. And so for that really important developmental period, he really didn't see much because I couldn't show him much. I mean, it was to the point that my mom had to come last minute from New York to California to stay with me for a week because I was so weak. And that was something that, when I got Arlo, and for those that don't know, when a trainer says like a field bred lab, a couple traits about that dog: high energy, extremely high energy. Like, imagine the highest energy dog and possibly higher energy than that. And I was in an apartment, and I had this really intense young dog. And when I got him, I didn't really have any physical symptoms. I think I might have had one sort of, like, it was a flare-up that I didn't know was a flare-up, because when I first came to Bergen, I just had psychiatric stuff was going on. And then about midway through, about the time I got Arlo, and we can go back in my mental history and say maybe it was some stress from getting this ill-suited puppy at a time that I probably didn't need a puppy, but that contributed to it. But my disability changed. I started having physical symptoms, and I'm still unraveling the different symptoms I have and what triggers them. I've gotten much better at it to the point that I'm like pretty functional at this point. Still, like, legally probably would be considered disabled, but and I would get really bad flare-ups where I would get horrible canker sores that meant I struggled to eat. I missed a ton of school. I would get really weak because I was struggling to eat. I mean, like, I'm talking maybe I would be able to have 2 smoothies a day on my like 4 days where it was as bad as it got, was sometimes not achievable, and even drinking water a lot of those days was like immensely painful.
Yep. I
So,
remember how painful that was when I had a canker sore on my tongue and I was just
right.
dying.
Like almost
So
everyone I know gets one canker sore and immediately, like they get their first canker sore and they text me and they go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you survived." Like, because it is, I mean, it's really, it's like nerve pain is the only thing. The only pain I can compare it to is when they give you a nerve block when you get major surgery. And if they don't keep the pain meds ahead of it, what happens is your body just stops responding to them. So the only pain that has been similar to it was when my nerve block wore off and I was like basically whimpering for a whole night. And it was a similar intensity of pain. So when I would have these flare-ups, I would get really weak. He was under exercised, and then more behavior problems would sort of come up. So that was really, one thing I preach a lot now to people is like, don't rush into a service dog if you've just started experiencing disabling XYZ symptoms, because they might change. That's something I really learned from my own journey, is I rushed into it before I really knew what my symptoms were. And I also, very common in service dog training, this is like the tenet of why I'm starting the business Finest Minds that I'm starting for service dog training, is that so many people feel like a psychiatric service dog is going to solve all of their problems. And it can, like something I learned through Bergen and I've learned to really appreciate, and you might have experienced too, is I think that training a dog, whether it's training your pet dog mindfully or training your own service dog candidate, can definitely help you improve yourself and can be a great mirror to your own behavior and your own personality traits. I think it can be very helpful, the training process. Mm-hmm. But you have to know what you're capable of handling going into it. And I, again, wouldn't change a thing because I learned so much from my journey. But I definitely, it's been a hard, Arlo is now 4.5. It's been a hard 4.5 years. So you had asked, when did I start training him? So I started training the second he came home. Like I said, when I first got him, I got really sick for about 2 weeks. So I had 2 people over twice during that period, and that's really all I could handle. And then I came out of the flare-up and I started immediately taking him to Lowe's and Home Depot. And this is, to this day, with my puppy clients, this is what I recommend. I would take a thick blanket, I'd put it in the cart, I'd put Arlo in the cart, and then we would just go around to different parts of the store and I would practice like luring him into a sit, luring him into a down, letting him look around and waiting. And when he looked back at me, paying out heavily. Every time someone walked by, I would just be feeding him for looking at the person, right? So the only reason that he became a successful service dog is because I am a dog trainer who has a special interest in behavior and was very lucky to be connected with all the resources I needed to get the information I needed to adjust his behavior to where it needed to be. And for about the first year I had him, until he was about 1.5 years old, I only represented him as a service dog in training when I would go to therapy. And that was after, I would go the first time without him when I would see I saw a couple different therapists during that time, because a couple of them were like specialty short-term treatment therapists. I would go the first time, no Arlo. I'd be like, listen, he is still getting over alert barking. He might bark at you. I had a male therapist. I had to warn, he might get wigged out when you move. I will be able to work him through it. And it's not going to be there's no danger. He's just big and he's just loud. Mm-hmm. And they gave me the okay and I would bring him. But that was really the only time I did much in the way of representing him as a service dog. Other than that, it was just pet-friendly training in pet-friendly stores and going on a lot of hikes. That was and remains to be his main form of decompression and my main form of decompression. He made his first stranger friend on a hike. He finally was able to start having people greet him on hikes when he was about 8 months old. He started being interested in women for sure. Men took a little longer. Actually, I think becoming your friend, Kevin, finally helped him go, oh, maybe men aren't so bad. But And so until he was about a year and a half old, I just was saying to myself, I'm raising the best dog I can raise. You know, at this point, I'm not going to rehome him right now. I want to see where he's at. I sort of kept putting off the date that I was going to reevaluate his suitability. I now wish that I'd had a specific date, but again, that's another thing I learned that I'm incorporating into my own program from my own, like, not failed attempt, but, you know, attempt.
Yeah.
So yeah, the training started as soon as I brought him home, but for a while it was just training him to be normal. And at about a year old, I finally was like, okay, all right, you're pretty normal. And so my first big test for him was at that age. I started about a year old. I started training tasks. So like I said, he was naturally empathetic and offered a lot of natural behaviors. I just shaped what I liked. Like if he had a reaction I liked to an emotional thing I did, I would reward it with like affection or petting. He's very petting oriented. And then at about a year, I started my formal alert training. So like, we would go to the grocery store was one of the only other places I would bring him as vested as a service dog when he was about a year old. And I would work on, like, when I bounce on my heels, you're supposed to hit me with your nose. When I chew on my nails, you're supposed to hit me with my nose. If I make this noise, you're supposed to bump me with your nose. And then his first big test was a year and a half old. I really wanted to go back to New York City. And so I was like, all right, we're going to try flying. Like, we're going to see how you do. And he actually did remarkably well. He did panic midway through the flight. It's a 6-hour flight. So it was it wasn't an easy flight.
No, I know. I like with flying 3 dogs from California to New Jersey or New York, it was quite the experience because one, the dog would have to hold its bladder for like 6 hours.
Right.
2, it would have to practice staying within your
it's like a little tiny space that they have.
The small space.
Yeah.
But where your feet was.
Yeah.
And all I remember was raising my feet so the dog can lay on that same place. And I would have to push my backpack way under, or I have to put it up there, up in the stow area. So and my legs are so sore.
Yeah, it was a big test. About 3 hours in, he got really worried and he tried to bolt. But I just held his harness and like waited, and then fed him a little bit, waited it out, and he was able to calm down. Later, I ended up getting him like just a very mild sedative to fly, which honestly, a lot of service dogs that sort of ride the line of, especially owner trained service dogs, where like with an owner trained service dog, traits that would make them like coping with stress. Owner trained service dogs, you can usually get away with a dog that copes not as great with stress than a program dog, because it's your dog, you're the handler. You know, like Arlo never would have made it past the first selection process in a program, but there were traits I could still work through. And because I'm his main bond, like on the plane with anyone else, he would have panicked and it would have been a big deal. But because it was me going, no, it's okay, we're fine, he was like, oh, okay, I guess we're probably fine.
Well, sure. I mean, to be fair, when you get it from when you get it from a different place, you know, like CCI and not an owner trained dog, I mean, they genetically speaking are mostly sound.
Right.
And so they're just
lower arousal. They're like lower excitement level dogs too, which, you know, goes a long way. And that's something I learned a lot too about, like, what is it really like to have a high drive service dog? You know, dog trainers usually use high drive to mean really intense. And like Arlo makes me look like such a good trainer when I show his like obedience, because it's really flashy. He does it really intensely. He's really good at it. But having that kind of energy as a service dog, it sounds better than it feels a lot of the time. Like, for example, a lot of the Bergen dogs I worked with, when we would go out, I would just tell them to lay down and they would settle. And then they were there. You know, they would just go, okay, I'll just hang out here. They might try to get up because they were interested in something, but they would sort of go, oh, what's that over there? Well, what's that? I'm interested, you know, mellower, right? When we go out and I put him somewhere, he's holding a downstay. So he's laying there going, I'm staying. Do you see how good I'm staying? Look at how good I'm staying. Look at how good I'm staying. You know, and it wasn't until he was like 3 years old that he started relaxing into the stay. Until then, it was like a formal downstay instead of just a settle, because that's where he was at emotionally. He was just on all the time. And so I learned a lot about what it actually feels like to have a dog that's that intense as a service dog. I always say, and have said and will say, Arlo is as intense, as high arousal or high drive as a service dog should be. He rides the line. Any more intense, and he would be too intense. And he was also the least intense dog in his litter. That's why Cody, his breeder, gave me that one. He was the least intense of the litter, which I'm not surprised knowing the bloodline. They're like pretty hot dogs, but
yeah, hot dogs.
Hot dog is a good way to, they run hot, but yeah. So, you know, that was like his big first test was flying, and he managed that. And now, like I said, he's 4. We've flown. He's gone on a big trip to Chicago, where he had to fly there and back with me and my mom. He's great on planes now. Like I give him a very slight amount of just like, you know, a little bit of a doggy joint basically, and he sleeps the whole time. So he's really good on planes now, and he handled Chicago really well. He's always been a little not iffy with kids, like not unsafe, but he's never really had that many friends that were children. And my cousin she was then 4 years old, and he did really good with her. He got to the point where he was like, okay, if you say she's cool, she's cool. She's fine. She doesn't bother me. Still too intense to be a service dog. Like, you know, he was still a lot to handle. But he managed it. You know, he was able to do it to the point that he helped more than he hurt, sort of. And he was fine. Like, it wasn't like he was too stressed out. A couple decompression walks here and there, and he was fine. So, you know, I as I said, the story ends with me retiring him at 4.5. And I kind of got to the place with him prior to the pandemic where we were living in California. He was capable of being a service dog in California. I was actually very pleasantly surprised by how well he did there. We moved back to New York City, and he did struggle in New York City. It's a more urban environment. We weren't really able to take the same amount of decompression walks. The outdoors wasn't as big a part of his life, right? And he got more stressed to the point that I didn't really work him as a service dog that whole time. I lived for like the 8 months I was in New York City, because it just was more work to have him than it was helpful, kind of. He was too on edge, too stressed out, like. And and then I, right before the pandemic hit, was like, well, I'll move. My family had a house on Long Island. So literally the week before everything shut down, I went out there and was like, I think I'm going to move out here and maybe see about, you know, I was working a desk job at the time that was remote from the time I started it. And so I could work anywhere. So I was like, maybe I'll see what it's like to live out here again. And then the world shut down, and I stopped working him because it just felt like very germy. Like a lot of my task work with him involves touching him. I was like, it's going to make me more anxious to have you and then think about the germs that might be on you than it is to just do it myself and use alternative coping skills to you. And so the whole pandemic, I didn't work him the whole pandemic. And we finally are getting to the point where I was ready to start working him again. And I've worked him once since the pandemic started. I took him to get my car serviced, and he was really good. I mean, he honestly, like, I put him under my chair and he laid down and he put his little head on his feet and he just like watched. He likes to people watch. But I really started thinking about, like, he's not his happiest self as a service dog. You know, like, again, he can do it. It's not like it's unfair. If someone brought this dog to me to evaluate who he is now, I would be like, yeah, he can be a service dog. You just have to manage his stress, right? But although
you do bring up this point, the fact that he wasn't this sound dog, like this was not your ideal
Right.
dog to train to be service work, right? Because like you probably would go back in time and just maybe like if you had a choice, if you want, because having a high drive dog like that with all those issues, it's stressful. It's like
Yeah.
I can't imagine, I can only imagine that dog gave you just as much canker sores as when you were
Right.
sick and all that,
As
and your
time
body
went.
will
Yeah.
react to the stress because of anticipation of if the dog blows up or if the
Right.
dog
And that's
goes,
that's a really good point. Exactly. Like even when Arlo was working at like 2 and 3, when he was like pretty good, I never fully trusted him not to react in situations. And that's not how you should feel about your service dog. Like they shouldn't be an additional point of anxiety. And I have from Bergen, I've worked dogs like that where I was like, ooh, like you're fine, but you might blow up,
yeah,
and that too, that became its own stress trigger so that I would get like really nervous. Arlo was going to blow up at stuff that we were well past that realistically, again, if someone had brought me the dog to evaluate, I wouldn't be like, yeah, this dog is going to blow up if a man looks him in the eye, stuff that he was past. But because it was in his behavior history, I never fully gave him my trust. And so I think that that definitely plays a role because now I'm starting to think, all right, as much as I love being a dog trainer, that's not all I ever want to be. I've realized I want to go to school for human mental health stuff. So I started thinking about what it was going to feel like to be in class with Arlo, and some of the programs I'm looking at are in more urban areas where I'm like, I'm not convinced that you're going to stress-wise be able to still handle service work. So like that played into it. And then the other thing is because this is a dog that has like way in the past, again, not the dog I have today is not going to blow up. Like I'm not trying to say I'm working a bad service dog, right? Like, again, he can do it. He's proven to me like, this dog people have done some weird things to him. Like a man has run up and stuck his face in his face and gone like this. A guy like grabbed his muzzle in line at Starbucks and just like went like that with it. Like, and he just like got tense and looked at me and was like, why is this happening? Like kids have run up and pulled his tail. Like people do weird stuff to service dogs. And he's shown me that he's certainly not a danger. And he can handle it. Like he'll just look at me in those situations. And that's what I want. But again, there's always that thing in the back of my mind of like, oh my God, I would feel so embarrassed. I would feel so embarrassed if he did react. So it's not
right.
I'm worried he's going to react. I'm worried that I'm going to be embarrassed by his behavior, kind of, even though I know he's probably not going to do anything.
Yeah, the big thing too is just like you have a lot of dog owners that have dogs kind of like that they want to make into like owner service dogs, so
right.
it's good to hear this from you because
right.
a lot of people are like asking, how can I make this dog
my
service animal with say like within reason, of course, like if it actually helps the task at hand or if it really enhances you. But then the thing is it has to be you have to be the one really knowing what your dog excels at, but then also too like what's your plan of action, what's like the tactical strategy for that kind of situation. But then going back to how stressful it would have been to continue his career is no different when I would talk to clients about like, whether to surrender a dog or keep a dog. It's like, does the stress of having this dog outweighs the joy of having the dog? And if it does, then it's not good for anybody, so it's just like you want to find the best placement, you want to find the best like I guess the best life for both you and him.
For that dog. And that's something that from the time I became a dog trainer, I've always been all about mental health, in humans. And one thing I really learned from the behavior work I do, and I say it all the time to my behavior clients, especially, is, we're really focusing on emotions before we focus on behavior, right? So like there are a lot of, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it too, situations where the dog is reacting where I'm going, just feed him, ignore it, just feed him, feed him, feed him, feed him. And then the dog goes, oh, and stops reacting. Right? We're using food to interrupt the behavior sometimes, or using food to change the emotional state. Even though we don't like the behavior we're seeing, we're not using food to feed the behavior. We're using food to change the emotions. And that's really something I have learned. You brought up a lot of really good points there of like when you're working, he is a really good example of the kind of dog that a lot of people bring service dog trainers, like people who train pet dogs and service dogs, are constantly inundated with requests of like, I have this dog, like I wanted to do with Evie. This is the dog I have. I really want a service dog. I'd like to train this dog, and Hannelore had a great, I really enjoyed listening to how she handles those situations. And I will probably reach out to her to talk through more about that, because my program is going to be largely virtual. So I'm trying to figure out a way to handle those situations virtually, like get a video evaluation, stuff like that. Because Arlo really has taught me a lot about that, okay, there's two different questions we need to ask. One is, can this dog be a service dog? Could, with training, with emotional change, with programming different behaviors, with improving your handling skills, could this dog reasonably perform the job of a service dog? And that's certainly one question. And then the second question is going to be, is it going to make you happy to have this dog as your service dog? And then subset, is it going to make this dog its happiest self? And that's really always been my thing with every dog I work with, every pet dog I work with, is like, we're trying to help your dog be its best self. The same way that I hope every person is out there trying to become the best version of themselves, right? Like, I have behavior traits of my own that I don't love, and I'm doing my best to tweak them to a point where I don't hate them. I think that we should do the same with dogs, and everyone should be striving to live their best human life. You should work in a career that at the very least, doesn't make you miserable. Ideally, something that makes you happy, but if not that, at least something that's not adding to your unhappiness,
Well,
and I really
big thing too, I notice, is just when the human's not in a good mental state, the dogs are not in a good mental state, and then the dogs just become a sponge to just take in our bad emotions.
And that is one thing that's one reason why, even when dogs aren't like behaviorally weird like Arlo was as a pup, I'm a big proponent that you don't get a puppy and start training it to be a service dog. Get a puppy and raise it to be a well-rounded adult dog. And then if at 6 months, 8 months, a year old, you're looking at the dog going, yeah, you're doing well. Okay, great. We can add some task work, but I am really all about wait to put the pressure on that puppy, because one, I really do, especially with psychiatric service dogs and I, mobility dogs, for those who don't know, you have to wait until the dog is physically mature to do any mobility, like weight bearing tasks, right? So same with guide work. They don't start training a dog to harness until they're at least 18 months old. But with psychiatric service dogs, the temptation is you get the puppy and you start bringing it everywhere with you because it's a cute puppy. And I've seen a lot of very promising young dogs burn out hard at a very young age from that. And then I also think that you're creating a dog that's much more likely to be feeding off of you if you do that. Like, one thing that was very important to me with Arlo and very important to me with the Bergen dogs that I saw promise in was that I didn't want my anxiety to make them worse, right? And Evie, my other dog, it does, like I said, it doesn't bother her. Like, one thing that, in fact, she's used all the time for right now in the past week, trainers from my company have barred, the company I work for have barred her 2 times for like nervous dogs that needed to meet a new dog. Because one thing she's great at is like, she doesn't get nervous that you're nervous. Or if the dog is freaking out, she's like, hey, who are you? You want to hang out? Like, let's go sniff this bush, you know? Arlo and I do sometimes feed off of each other. That is one trait he has that I struggle with. And I tried to set his training up so that I didn't like exacerbate that. Like I didn't stoke that fire. But it's hard. You know, I think a naturally empathetic dog attached to a person with a really high level of stress, just like you're managing your own stress, you have to have a plan to manage the dog's stress. And so again, like I've really gotten to the point with Arlo where, so after the pandemic, like I said, I worked him at this place and he did great. Like I couldn't have asked for him to do better. My only complaint is that he wasn't as perfect in a heel as I'd hoped. And that's because he's been a pet dog for a year and like his heel hasn't had to be perfect. So he's taken some liberties there. He settled under my chair. A bunch of like weird noises happened that didn't bother him. Men were popping in and out of doors, all different doors, didn't even like really even raise his head when they would come in. Like he did wonderfully, but I was thinking about how he'd felt, like how he'd been all pandemic, you know, and the happiest I've ever seen him was when we were living on Long Island with my parents, like right in the thick of the pandemic, right before I moved to North Carolina. And I wasn't seeing clients at the time. So I wasn't asking him to be a distraction dog. I wasn't doing any dog work with him. He was just a pet and we got to go on lots of walks in nature. And through the pandemic, my parents decided that instead of going back to New York City, they're actually going to live out on Long Island now. And their dog is like 12. She's getting older. And I'm really worried how they're going to handle it when she eventually passes away. And I've been kind of like, it's sort of like one of those worries if you have any of them that like for a month, it doesn't hit you. And then it hits you like really hard for 3 days. You're like, oh my gosh, Josie's getting old. They handle grief so poorly. Like, so I've been kind of worried about them. They don't have any pets other than this dog. They're not going to get a second dog, even though I think they should. And then it just sort of hit me like Arlo would love to go be their pet. You know, I'm about to go embark on something that's probably going to involve moving. It's probably going to involve like a lack of stability for the next 5 years for sure. Certainly in where I'm living, like whether that's local or whatever, right? And he doesn't like that. Evie loves it. She's like, oh my gosh, another adventure. Great. New friends. Hi, who are you? This is a cool apartment. Like she's totally unbothered by it. And Arlo is not horribly bothered by it, but he does need like a 3-month hiatus to adjust when I move to a new place is what I've found. And so I just decided, you know what, this guy's going to be so much happier as a pet dog. And it's going to be easier for me to just have Evie for sure. She's a much easier dog to own.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's smaller, she adapts well. I mean, if you had it where you had a transition, but we're staying in the same area and things were like easier, you know, things would have been different. But then it's still like, you know,
if I didn't decide I wanted to go do my master's program and potentially move, and you know, if that wasn't my 5-year plan, I would keep him and he would be my service dog. So it's a really interesting place I'm finding myself in of like, I am really rehoming him because I think he'd be happier, not because I think he's not capable of what I'm asking of him, because he'll do it if I ask him. I mean, honestly, he even might be able to keep being a service dog, but I just feel like he would be so much happier living a quieter life. And also he's the perfect dog for my parents, you know.
Sure.
They'll ruin him a little bit, but
I mean, it's a happy win-win. I mean, one is like at least you didn't have to rehome him to someone that's just like, you know, I want a lab, and then they're not going to do everything that you tell them to do. And I mean, it's your parents, so of course you're going to go visit them, and then you're gonna see him, you know, and it makes you happy. He might, of course, maybe he may or may not get fat, but you know, that's just
he's probably, I mean, they'll probably neuter him. I'm gonna leave that up to them because right now he's intact and for those that don't know, usually an intact dog keeps weight off better than like if you neuter a dog, you'll notice they gain weight much quicker. And I purposely kept him intact because a small subset of dogs, when you neuter them, if they lack confidence, they actually get worse because sometimes testosterone does boost that confidence a bit. And I'm highly suspicious he would be one of those dogs just from like the personality traits he has. I was like, I really like who you are. I don't want to mess with it. So I kept him intact. But yeah, they'll probably neuter him because it's just easier as a pet dog to have him be neutered.
Yeah.
So he'll gain weight and he'll take liberties, you know, but he'll be much happier. He'll have much less rules.
For sure. So
yeah.
So now I've got two more questions. So like, how many moments did you have where you were like, this isn't gonna work? This is like no way this is going to work after like one, either a bad trip down to the market, or like, you know, you had anticipated something really bad, but nothing happened. And then I guess the other thing, like if you would have kept the dog or decided, you know, after all this and you take him back, would you try to give him something else to do, like a dock, like would he be a dock diving dog? If you had a second choice, you know, like what's a life you could have given him that could, one, fulfill him, but then fulfill that drive of his, that you would also be like, you know, this is cool, I would like to explore this part of dog training with Arlo.
Those are two very good questions. So the first question, in terms of like how many times did I spin out, more than I can count. I would say most of it was like that existential, oh my God, what if it doesn't work out? What have I done? Versus actual situations. Because again, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I'm a very good dog trainer. And so the actual times he would like react was almost zero. Like to most people, they were like, when we would go on field trips, they'd be like, wow, you know, it wasn't, at no point would someone look at him and go, gosh, that dog shouldn't be in a vest or shouldn't be a service dog, or because he looked to the uneducated eye really good. And his saving grace is that he's incredibly engaged, and that's very much a genetic trait. You know, I talked a lot about some of his genetic traits I don't like. Well, he actually has a lot that I love, and that's one of the big ones, is that I've never met a more genetically in tuned dog. And I actually have talked to, I am making a friend out here who does, she has a number of British fieldbred English Springer Spaniels. So very different from the show lines. And they're British lines, which Arlo is, for those that don't know. He comes from, like, his father was imported from Ireland. His mother's grandmother was, I think, a British import, or his mother's mother was a British import, I think. But so he comes from imported lines, which the lines in the UK are very different from the American field lines. There's a reason that I went to the UK lines. Interestingly, the traits that I like in Arlo are all traits that I was just, the other day, my first, like, I'm vaccinated, I can see people again. I was talking with this trainer who has fieldbred English Springers, and we were like bonding over how some of our, like, when I first taught him to sit at a distance from me, I just went, Arlo, sit. And if you do that with 90% of dogs, they'll come and they'll sit in front of you, right? Arlo was like 100, 200 feet away, looked at me and just sat there. I've never had another dog just teach themselves to sit at a distance. It means nothing to them. And she was saying she sees this, Audrey was saying she sees this in the British line Springers too. And natural engagement is another one, like just staring daggers at you. Like, what are we doing next? What are we doing? What are we doing? And very food motivated, which helps. Very toy motivated, which helps. So he had a lot genetically that was going for him. And that's why he managed to sort of balance the scales out and be who he is. But a lot of times that I spun out where I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And honestly, one of the reasons why I don't regret even a second of my experience, while it was much more difficult than it could have been. Like, I could have just waited to get my service dog prospect till I was done with Bergen. I could have just spent the time with the Bergen dogs, but there was a reason why I was
struggling. And then, guys, with Bergen dogs, we refer them as Bergen dogs because they are service dogs in training at Bergen. Yeah. So for those who are confused, just wanted to clarify that before anything.
So for when Kevin and I were in school, part of our program, which was good and bad, awesome experience, but mentally very taxing. Every 6 to 8 weeks, we would get a new dog. And that was something that broke my heart. I mean, there are still dogs that I like Richmond was the dog that I just fell in love with. Kevin knows Richmond. He worked with his brother Robbie.
Oh, we do not speak of Robbie. That weirdo.
Robbie was such a weirdo. But there were certain dogs, like Thomas is another one I think of all the time, that I just bonded so closely with, and it broke my heart to fall in love with a dog, and then as soon as you start getting a rhythm with that dog, give it to a new trainer and then have to totally ignore it because you want it to be successful with its new trainer. It was a really tough sort of rotation in that way. And that's, I think, emotionally one of the things that made me want my service dog is like, I was really struggling emotionally with that part of it, the rotation. But anyways, I wouldn't change a thing because it taught me so much about the experience. And that's one thing that I think it benefits people that are training their own service dog. Like, one thing I always say, so separate from what I do now, previous to the job I had, for a little over a year, I worked at Catch Canine Training Academy as a program director. So I was sort of like the behind the scenes connection to the curriculum, that all the people that were in the program who were studying to be dog trainers from the core curriculum, they would talk with me about their dog training questions, right? And I talked with a lot of up and coming trainers about service dog training. I talked with students that were mine, as well as, other program directors. If they had a student that had a question, they'd set up a call with me. And I've said to a lot of people who want to become trainers and people who are want to become service dog, like break into service dog training, and especially people that are looking to train their own service dog, is I do really think that the difference between success and failure when you're choosing a trainer, when it comes down to that, is someone who has actually lived the experience that they're helping you through is worth its weight in gold. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people who do offer service dog training and they're very competent at it. And I think for some people they work great. But one thing that you find out when you're looking to train your own psychiatric service dog is that owner training in general doesn't have a great success rate. So like you got like a 90% right out of the gate, you have an 80 to 90% chance that any one dog isn't going to be suitable. Like even programs that breed their own dogs, 80% of puppies usually that they produce in a year, the studies have shown usually they're just not equipped for service work. They don't make it to the end of the road. Those are dogs that are literally made to be service dogs. They make great pet dogs, those dogs, but owner training, even lower success rate. And psychiatric service dog owner training, incredibly low success rate. I know many service dog trainers, people who train service dogs, that won't work with psychiatric service dogs in owner training because their experience has been that the success rate is so low. And I really think that comes down to the fact that it's different. Just like it's different to train a seizure alert dog than a mobility dog, or a gluten alert dog than even a diabetic alert dog. You have
it really depends though, because it's just like everyone's different, everyone's processing things differently, and it's just like, just because person one has this psychiatric disability is different from what the next person is going to be, and it's just so broad. And also too, like even with me, I get several inquiries about, can you help me train my pet dog to be a service dog, because they see my credentials at Bergen, and I'm just like, unfortunately I don't do that anymore. And then I also don't want backlash, it's just like the dog does something in public and then it has my
Yeah.
it's under my name with training, and then it doesn't
Yeah.
really good. And then of course it's like I want good representation of service animals, and for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I only have one owner trained service dog, and that was like when I was young and very cocky back then. Not that
Yeah.
I'm more cocky now, but I was just like in my
No, I
first.
know the Kevin you're talking about. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, like it was like it was like my first year of bachelor's, and then it was like this white German Shepherd
Oh
in
boy.
San Francisco,
Yeah.
and the owner had like a stroke and couldn't use his left hand.
Yeah.
So I had to train the German Shepherd to pick things up and bring it to work the working hand
Right.
within 9 days,
Yeah.
within like 2 weeks and 9 days, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, and I'm doing this while I have school, and then
Right.
like it was like winter break, and
Yeah.
I'm just like okay, and that was the one time that I used the clicker, and I need to use the clicker more. I have been very not utilizing that, but I clicker train. I clicker train in the garage. I still have videos of that dog picking things up and
Yeah.
bringing it to me, and like doing a brace, and like the dog,
Yeah.
like when I mean brace, like the dog goes next to the good side, and then I can place my arms to get up, and I was like, oh god, I only had 9 days with this dog. I'm like,
Yeah.
this dog gonna be good. And then it was just like I brought her out as much as I can, and then we did the go home, and then I didn't really hear anything back then, but apparently like she performed everything with the guy like when we did the go home. But I was just like, oh, that was a lot.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
so
it is one thing. I think you bring up so many interesting points there. Like, I mean, one big point you bring up there is that I think when people contact you to say, will you help me train my dog to be a service dog, they often are thinking about task work, and to the normal public, task work is what looks more complicated because it's these like incredibly complex behaviors. But to the service dog trainer, we're like, yeah, I can train your dog to stand still while I do that. But are their joints able to handle it? I can train your dog to go pick that thing up, most dogs. I do know some people, like we did go to school with someone who had a Rottweiler who was like 10 and she's like, I can't get her to put anything in her mouth. Some dogs are stubborn on that, but I can train your dog to go pick that thing up and bring it to you, right? But like, is it going to be capable of doing that when someone is trying to pet it as it does it? Is it going to be creeped out by that person? Is it going to be too interested? I can train your dog to alert to any number of little ticks you do, but are they going to be paying attention to you over the guy over there that's making kissy noises? The service dog trainer is always thinking about everything behind the task work is what's tough, is what makes it hard for me to say, yeah, you can make this dog a service dog. The personality of the dog, the way it copes with stress. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think a lot of people fall into that bear trap. They find a trainer that can train the task work, but sometimes it falls through the crack of like, well, did the dog get a thorough behavior evaluation to make sure they were ready for it? Did we work on any of the slight stress behaviors they saw? It's such a complex path. And I think you also bring up a good point of like, if you're a trainer, don't do it unless you at the very least have a solid mentor that has experience in it. Mm-hmm. And don't assume you can do it just because you can train the task behavior, because sometimes you're setting yourself up for liability, or sometimes you're just not going to feel as good. Separate from whether the dog did or not, you might not feel as confident in the product, and how you feel about that matters just as much as the outcome in my mind.
Yeah, I mean and then the other thing you brought up too was just like failure is never like bad. Failure is just a lesson in life to just go from, and then just keep going, but to know that okay, I need to do this instead, or this didn't work. Let me find a different way of approaching this. I mean, for me, like there's been some failures that I keep inside here that I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this instead. I'm not going to rush with this. But then sometimes it's like it goes back to when you stay safe. Stay safe is like
Right.
you're in your comfort zone, but then you don't try anything else. And sometimes you regret that at times.
Yeah.
But I mean, I relate to my clients all the time when they have German Shepherds or when they have reactive dogs. And I just say, I totally get you. I totally understand. I had Nova, who's my Belgian
Right.
Malinois, who was dog reactive. And
Right.
and I tell everyone, she was my biggest pain in the ass for like
She was the
a
worst.
year a year and a half, and then next thing you
Yeah.
know, 2.5 years old, and now 5 years old, this dog is doing stuff in front
Yeah.
of other dogs. This dog is like my ideal Belgian Malinois, and I say that now, but
Yeah.
it's like
Well, and that
she's
really too, it's interesting because in the service dog training community, people want to put a clock on a dog. They always want to put a clock on the dog. And that's really true. Both Nova and Arlo were super weird when they were young. Like at 1 year, 2 years old, we would look at them and go, oh no, like this is not what we imagined for the dog we thought we were getting, right? But
Mhm.
now at Arlo's 4.5, Nova's like 5.5 now, where I think she's like a year older than him. They're our ideal dogs in a lot of ways. And it really does go to show, like, that's one thing I also feel very strongly about with owner trained service dogs is that don't look at the program model when you're raising that dog, because one of the reasons that 80% of dogs don't make it through the program, that they get washed out as pet dogs or sometimes facility dogs, is because they're constantly evaluating at different ages where that dog is at and going, is it worth continuing to put money into this dog as a program? And the dog is out the door by 2 years old, right? Like, I don't know any programs that keep dogs past 2 years old, because if they need to, the dog has usually been career changed or washed out. And a lot of dogs mature more slowly than that. I mean, Arlo really didn't hit his stride until 3 years old. And then he did hit his stride. And again, like, I'm not really retiring him because he can't do the job. I just think he'd be happier as an adventure dog for my parents. And it's like, this perfect home exists. How can I keep him from his perfect home? So yeah, that's another really interesting point too, of like, and I see it all the time with my pet dog clients. Like, I'm working with right now a German Shepherd who is so weird. Oh my gosh, this dog is like, he's from very serious working police lines and he's in a pet home.
Oh, lovely.
The owner knows way more than most pet dog trainers. I mean, I'm constantly telling her, like, I'm blown away by how normal you've made this dog. And he's like 1.5. So in my mind, I'm like, hey, until he's 3, there's plenty of stuff we can still improve on. Like, this is not who this dog is going to be forever. He's always going to be a little weird and harder to handle, but you can get to a point where you feel like comfortable. Like, this is the type of dog that he's a little apprehensive of new people. He's a little defensive. He's very forward in his response, but he's extremely well trained. So he'll hold a downstay. But if a man like ran up and he was in a downstay, he would hold it until the man touched him, and then he might try and like. There's a good
he's in the down, but he's not doing it down because he's calm. He's doing it in the down because he was
he's
told
doing like
to.
a really intense. I'm laying down. I'm laying down. I'm laying down. I'm laying down. I'm laying down.
Yeah.
But he's only 1.5. And so something I keep saying to his owner is like, there's a ways forward that we can take this dog. Like, that is something that Arlo and Nova too, getting to see Nova's journey through her own emotions, taught me a lot about, is like, separate from service dogs, just dogs. Don't rush them. It's just like, I'm 25. Jayne at 25 is much more behaviorally normal than Jayne at 20. Certainly Jayne at 18. Like, Jayne at 25 would not have liked Jayne at 18,
I remember. Well, I'm pretty sure, Jayne, how old were you when I graduated?
22. I was 21 when I started the program. So I guess you graduated, I would have been 22, like just turning 22.
So 20, I'm pretty sure 22. Half of that year you weren't really you weren't my friend then. And
Yeah,
I remember I did one presentation and we went off a little
I was
bit.
thinking about that earlier today, actually.
And to be fair too, I didn't know what I was talking about either. And then I look back like a few years back, and what I know now, I'm like, oh my god, what have I done? And I wish I could have redone a new topic or redo that whole presentation, because I like question myself when I'm this 26 and I'm just like, Jesus.
Well, again,
like,
it's you at 26 look back at you at what, like 23, being like, yeah, no, that's not who And I will say one thing, like, for people that are watching, Kevin and I mentioned we're really good friends. And I do really, this friendship has been, I think, so good for both of us as trainers. Like, it really helped both of us find more of like a center, I think. And certainly I can say from my perspective, made me, oh my gosh, such a wildly a better trainer. And it was funny that you mentioned that, that one that you did, because I was thinking about that earlier today. And I was actually thinking about how a lot of the stuff that I said about, like, the issues I took with what you were talking about, I wouldn't necessarily, a lot of them I wouldn't necessarily take now. Like, I've really changed my opinion of, for example, like, is it ethically okay to ever use tools as a trainer, like e-collars or proms? I don't really use them a lot in my own training, but that doesn't mean that I think that they're cruel, and I think one thing I really learned from our friendship that I've really tried to share with, like, other people I've connected with that are sort of coming up in the industry is that the best thing that you can do, I think, as a human, but especially in the dog training world, is have an open mind and be okay with the fact that with the same information, not everyone is going to come to the same opinion as you,
Sure.
And I'll say, like, I am better able to help people as a trainer that is happy to talk with and give respect to other trainers, even if they train very differently than me. I'm much better able to help. I can think of 2 clients off the top of my head that certainly one of them I would not have helped nearly as much if I didn't have that opinion. And it's really the difference between that woman keeping that dog and feeling safe with that dog, and there potentially not have being a home that would feel safe with that dog, basically.
Well, yeah, and then I mean also to yours, get that whole dynamic. 2 dog trainers are not going to agree about what the third dog trainer is, and then you're gonna get haters as you become more, you get more into the career. And I mean, so far I don't have wood on me right now. I don't have any haters right now, but it's just like there's always going to be something that people are going to say, like, oh, Kevin's missing this, or yada yada. But it's just about also just knowing that they're there, but you just don't care. It's just you do. I keep going, like, I'm going like all over the spectrum with training. It's not like I am force free until I need to use tools, because I learn from all different trainers, like all the best dog trainers in the world. It's just like,
and not all the best dog, like, some of the best dog trainers don't use tools, and some of them, like, that win world championship competitions, use tools in ways that, hey, maybe it would be interesting, at least to understand how they use it, whether or not you intend to use. That's kind of like always, I think that's a really good attitude to have. Like, just go hear what they have to say and see how it sits with you. Yeah.
I mean, it kind of just feels like dog training is like a big whole puzzle piece you have to put together. So like, e-collar, clicker,
like they want to fit you in a little descriptive box.
Like they all fill in a gap, and then when I first started out doing, watching Caesar Milan and Dog Whisperer, like that was one big chunk, because that's all I knew. But then now it's like after graduation and service dog training, then I just kept stacking the puzzle pieces.
Like, I think King was someone who influenced us both a lot in terms of pulling you more to the side of like, oh, maybe I'll think more about using like food and rewards, and definitely pulling me more to the side of like, you're not like, it's unfair to call it abuse to use a tool like a prong. Like maybe on a certain dog in a certain situation, it can be used that way, but let's take the foot off the gas pedal and not like jump the gun and say anyone that uses a prong collar is abusive to a dog. You know, she was who really helped me like get a better head on my shoulders about.
Yeah, like Trish King was like, you know, just is very good, you know, just talking about what's realistic, but then also just like management techniques. But then of course it's just like I can name a top few trainers from the top of my head, you know, like Heather Beck, you know, I learned socials. I did socials, and now I'm helping several dogs that would not be in social setting with other dogs except that group. And then you enjoyed the socials like especially well because your dog was then that best social dog, and then now look, he was better with dogs like after that.
He's only mildly weird with other dogs because of that.
And then like there's Tyler Muto, you know, there's Michael Ellis, there's Larry Crone, and then now I'm starting to, you know, I signed up for Grisha Stewart.
And
then
we were talking about Michael Shicasio's course.
And then Michael, how do you say Shikashio, you know, like I want to, after listening to his podcast, I'm like, cool. And then he's going to be in San Diego and I'm going to be super excited for that. And, you know, doesn't matter if force free, you know, you use a little bit of corrections, you know, you just put it all together to make yourself well-rounded.
It is really, it's interesting how much, and actually Michael Shikashio, we were just talking about, he was just on the Canine Paradigm. There's a really interesting discussion that he had with those guys about aggression, because that's Michael Shikashio is a trainer that specializes in aggression. And one thing he said on that podcast is he was like, well, I don't actually describe myself like he's not out there going, I'm a force-free trainer, or I'm a tool-free trainer, or I'm a R+ trainer, or I'm a balance trainer. Like he's not the one putting labels on him, but he's still, it's so funny that in so many circles, his name still carries labels. It's this, I mean, it's become this very almost politicized environment in the dog world of like, people want you to choose a side. And I'm someone who doesn't really care to. Like, I don't label my training as anything other than dog training. You know, again, my big motto is like emotions before behavior. You know, I'm here to change the emotional, to give the dog emotional well-being, you know, but how I get there is going to be a different journey for every dog. I don't like putting I don't think that those labels do anything other than confuse the general public, because then as consumers, you're sitting there going like, well, balance trainers sounds good. And then you hear force free and you're like, well, if you use force, that's not very nice. So that must be better, you know? And I think R+ I don't like because it doesn't really explain the general.
You also put a flag on your head, or you put like, you know, a target on your head, depending on what
camp you put yourself in or people.
Depending on what area you're in, also depending like what platforms you are hanging with or what conferences you're going to, you know.
And it's interesting because so many of our clients don't really know that. Like, they just want to train their dog. And it's this like world that you might not, I mean, maybe someone watching this doesn't know about it. It's an interesting, like the murky depths of dog training kind of.
Yeah. I mean, the important thing too, is like a lot of people just want to be dog trainers just because they thought they're only working with dogs, but the people skills is just as important. And you have to have the skills to pay the bills. And, you know, it's just like, that's what Michael has said, you know, in his part of his program, Aggressive Dog Master Program, is just how to talk with people. And also, by the way, if you guys are interested in what Michael Shikashio and the other podcast, it is Canine Paradigm by Pat Stewart, Glenn Cook, and Michael Shikashio, the bitey end of the dog.
Yeah.
And then, you know, aggressivedog.com, you know, they're both great stuff, good content. But yeah, it's just the people skills is important too. I end up being like dog trainer, Dr. Phil, sometimes they tell me what's
Right.
wrong, and then I say, okay,
Oh,
that's why
yeah.
your dog's reacting. And then babysitter, sometimes I have to talk to the
Yeah.
children
Yeah.
on how to act with the dog. So it's just,
Well, and realistically, as a dog trainer, you're not really like, I don't, unless there's a safety reason or the owners are horribly outdogged, I don't really take the dog's leash to train it because I'm not actually helping them then. I can get the dog to do what I want, no problem. And even when, like, I don't know if you've found this, even when I take the leash and show that, like, I'll show them sometimes and hand the leash back. And it's like I didn't even describe it a lot of the time. Like, we're still starting from zero. So it's really you're exactly right. I think it's, you really have to learn how to coach. I just have to tell my boss to just put Evie in the door 1 second. I'm going to go unlock it so she can do that. But
no problem.
yeah, and that's sort of what led me to become like interested in the mental health side of humans, is that I realized that as much as I love training dogs, and I hope to always train dogs, that will always be a part of my professional life moving forward, but I really like working with the humans. And I think that's what, when you're a dog trainer, that's what's going to save you from burning out, is that you like working with the humans and you find the type of training that lights you up. And then you're going to be good. You're not going to burn out. You're going to figure out how to balance it so that you're still enjoying training, years down the line. But it is, yeah, the worst thing I could hear when I was working at Catch, I would always have an introductory call with a student. And I dreaded the calls that would be like, I just love dogs, and didn't say anything about humans. Would just talk about how much they love dogs for the whole half an hour. And it's like, oh, that's great. But I would always write in their notes then, like, circle back, star, didn't mention humans in initial call or something like that, because so many people don't realize how much, it is really like 80% working with people and 20% working with dogs. If you really love dogs and you only want to work with dogs, be a dog walker. You'll be happier.
Or just a dog sitter,
or a dog sitter, exactly. Yeah, no, for sure.
So yeah, I think
really quick.
Go for it. So going back to the other question, like, if Arlo wasn't a service dog, what would you have made him do?
So, I mean, one of my criterias when I was getting Arlo, a couple of my criterias were that I wanted a dog I could do stuff with, because when I got him, I had been wanting to be a dog trainer for a year and self-educating. And I knew, like, going into Bergen, I didn't know a lot more than a lot of the people in the program, because I basically spent a whole year reading like every book and every study, like a lot of like hands-on. That's something I learned at Oberlin, was how to really engage with a scientific study. So I was like really going into the research prior to starting. And then at Bergen, we got exposed to like all these different kinds of training. It would have been right when I started thinking about getting Arlo, getting my service dog, was when we had a whole semester where, and this was when Kevin and I were both in the program together. It was Kevin's last semester, my second semester. We had a whole semester of just different dog stuff, like dock diving, where they're on like a pool with like a big pier and they jump off the end as far as they can go, and trick dog stuff and disc stuff, like frisbee tricks with a dog, and they run really far out to catch it, disc dog. We did all this really fun stuff, and I knew I wanted a dog that could do that. And Evie, as much as she's awesome, like she's wonderful, but she's not built very well. So like I initially wanted to do agility with her, but about a year into that training, I decided your body's not going to hold up if I do a lot of jumping and short stops and movement with you. I knew I wanted a dog that was like physically fit to do it and had the drive to do it. And so that was one of my criterias. And I'm so glad that I went with a field bred lab. Like that's one thing if people come to me, and I've had a lot of people come to me being like, I want a higher drive service dog, especially people who are dog trainers and getting a service dog prospect. Be like, I want a higher drive service dog prospect so that I can do for the same reasons I wanted it. And I always say to them, like, okay, go look at field-bred labs probably are going to be your go-to, because while they're extremely intense and they can be sharp, like sharp meaning I get uncomfortable, I feel really strongly and I have a lot to say about it. You know, a calmer dog, you usually don't see them light up with that little warning. They're still a lab, so like they're still predisposed to like people. They were bred to find it genetically fulfilling to like go get something really quickly and bring it back. Hey, little Chihuahua.
He hit his head on the desk when he was trying to squeeze in. So I'm just...
But so yeah, if Arlo weren't a service dog and I was just keeping him as a pet, I think that the thing he would most enjoy would be disc. He's very good at tracking them and like jumping for them. I'm just bad at throwing them is really what holds him back. But the really nice thing is that like one conversation I'll have to have with my parents is like, you're going to have to play with him at least 3 times a week. But Arlo was bred to go sit on a duck stand really quietly for hours and then go get ducks and bring them back. And so playing with Arlo, genetically fulfilling play for Arlo is like, I put him in a stay, I throw the ball as far as I can put it, and then I tell him to go get it. And he gives it to my hand and I do that again.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I really think I feel like if you're going to get a higher drive dog for service work, a field lab is a good idea, because what they find genetically fulfilling is easy to give them versus like, I just know a service dog trainer who I respect a ton, this was one of the things that prompted me to like reevaluate Arlo's happiness. She had a dog that was a year old from very serious bite sport lines, he was a working bred Malinois, and he was doing really well. Like it wasn't that he couldn't do the work, but she actually ended up rehoming him back to his breeder, and he's going to become his breeder's competition dog. Because it makes him happier to do that. Because for a bite sport bred Malinois, what they find genetically fulfilling is going and playing really aggressive tug games that doesn't really fit in as well. You know, like when Arlo would travel, I would fit in fetch drills that are from Gun Dog. Like we took a couple weeks of a Gun Dog course, so I knew enough to set up a few different easy fetch drills. And that was his decompression, and that was enough. If he were a different kind of working bred dog to be genetically fulfilled, I might have to play like some very physically tiring tug with him, which I may or may not have the space or the time to do, you know. So that was, again, one of his genetic saving graces. And one reason that it's nice that even though he can't be a service dog, it's actually very easy to fulfill his genetic drives. Just some disc in the yard. And while he could be a competition dog, like, again, if I asked him to, he could be a competition dog, and, you know, I could teach him disc stuff, no problem. But I don't think he would. If he could speak and I said, do you want to go travel to a bunch of new places and do disc for an hour and then travel home? He would be like, I'd rather go for a hike or play in the yard, you know, like he doesn't love it. So that's a good question though.
All right. So I don't think I answered your question on how I felt about his retirement after, I mean, we just kind of the bad thing with dog training, we just go off tandem and then like, at least Hannah-Laura, like last time she took like almost 2 hours too, so this is fine.
Yeah.
and it's my day off, that's why I'm totally okay with this. But I'm happy, you know. I mean, it's like at first I was like, one thing when you were stressed out of Bergen and then we get a puppy along with another dog, another service dog in training, and I'm just like, oh my god, this girl's crazy. But you know, just seeing the progress and all that and how you changed, which is great, because I just thought, you know, she and I are not going to be friends because we have different philosophies. This is Jayne, the researcher, that just, you know, totally goes off, totally just like said, this is not research and all that good stuff. And
yeah,
when you like I knew that it took a lot of work for you to maintain him and to like you were always just paying attention to him, like when we would go to restaurants and all that. But at the end, I'm like, good for you. It's like, and he made you a better trainer, and that's how great trainers are made, is through difficult dogs when they learn how to go through it or think about like what they could have done better next time.
Right.
Um, but no, I think it was good. I mean, thank God it was your parents versus like rehoming him actually to some random person.
I
But
know.
but that's the thing. Sometimes dogs just don't cut it, and then they just need to be dogs, and that's why.
Or sometimes they're just happier. Like, because for me, it really does feel like we did eventually find a jive that worked for us. Like but then, he told me over the pandemic, he really liked being a pet. Yeah. No, it's interesting to
Yeah.
hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he definitely could have done it, could have continued, but you are only one person, and you have to have your sanity.
Right.
But then also too is just like what the dog is at that point, like what is he feeling?
Right.
What's ideal for him, right? Because if you had a droopy like old English lab that kind of didn't
Right.
give a shit for anything, it's like that'd be totally different. But then with him, it's just like kind of feels like you're walking with a loaded gun, kind of.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, not a loaded gun that like, because for people that don't know him, I don't want them to be like, oh my gosh, is Jayne out there working like a dog that might bite someone? Like, that's not what Kevin means. He means like,
sorry, I've labeled him that way. I
so,
thought I wanted the name. I need to say some. I have to figure out something else to call him then.
a dog that like, it's interesting because I grew up riding horses, and if he were a horse, he would be a horse you couldn't pay me to get on. Like the type of horse that is constantly going, I want to run as fast as I can. I want to run let's go. I want to run as fast as I can. Oh my gosh, is that a jump? I want to run as fast as I can. Like, I'm always just going, whoa, calm down, focus, whoa. Like a lot of behind the scenes communication that to a non-dog trainer, they wouldn't even notice. But dog trainers, I think, would look at and go, wow, they're needing to be in like every step I would take, I would have to communicate with Arlo where he needed to be, kind of. And he did it really well, like, but just he's so constantly on, I think, is sort of what you're describing. Like he's like lives life at a 10, and not in a way that's dangerous to the public, but in a way that's really tiring to constantly be conversing with, let's say.
Well, yeah, maintain, yeah, especially just like, he's got all this energy. He's got a lot of emotions, and then, like, I mean, kudos to you for hanging on that long. I'm I'm not like, for me, I'm not gonna go and talk to another trainer being like, hey, you should be doing this, or this isn't gonna I don't think it's gonna work. I just let you do you.
Yeah.
And I just respect whatever you guys do. And then I'm like, cool, good for you. And then, if you need input, I'd be happy to get input, but I won't give input unless it's needed, just because it's just out of respect. And, I respect you as a fellow professional. So that's where it's just like, that's why I'm saying things like this now. So
it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, for sure, because it was like I didn't want too real a perspective on it while I was raising him, because he was so ill fit for so long. But it's like a good example of like why Arlo is just a tiring dog to own. Is like you'll play heavy fetch with him for 20 minutes, take him on an hour-long walk. He sleeps for half an hour. I'm sitting on my couch, he's dead asleep. I stand up and he's like, oh, what are we doing next? And it's like I haven't exercised him at all. Like just a dog that could go all day. And the lifestyle I thought I was going to have isn't necessarily lifestyle I have. I'm going to be in apartments for the next probably 3 to 5 years for sure. Where I thought I would be in a house, like right out of school. I expected I was going to move somewhere, get a job, live in a house, and have a yard. And he doesn't even really like being a dog trainer's dog. Like He doesn't really like coming to the facility. It gives him stress poops. He doesn't really like doing dog work that much. Like, he was actually pretty okay with it when we were living out by you, but I think between not doing it for a while and then me throwing him back into it, it does stress him out more than I'd like it to. Like, again, he can mostly do it, but he's difficult, and he doesn't enjoy it. So it's a very, again, I wouldn't trade any second of the journey at all. Thanks, Nora. I wouldn't trade any second of the journey at all. It was wonderful, and I learned so much through him, with him, from him, but he'll be much happier as a pet, and I am really looking forward to it just being Evie, and I also have 6 rats, so Evie and my rats. My rat dog and my real rats.
Right. So, all right. So I think...
Before we go, come on up. Nope, just bouncing off the couch.
All right, so I think I got one more question. I think this is more an opinion of yours, and then I think we'll wrap up and just
perfect,
and then just have the rest of the day. But how my opinion, because you started off when I first met you very the science of this, the research of this. Like, how did you feel when you first met me at school? But then as you were involved with me, just like helping me around dogs, how much did that perspective change? And then what's your opinion about back then and then of me now? So.
Well, I think there's 2 layers to that question. One layer being like your journey, and the other layer being like how my own beliefs about what is ethical and what is safe and what is fair have changed. So I'll answer those separately. I think in all things with dog training, my favorite ever quote, Chad Mackin, who's another trainer, shares it a lot, and him sharing it really brought it to my mind, which is, it's a Maya Angelou quote, and it goes something along the lines of I did then what I knew how to do, and now that I know better, I do better. And that is really like my guiding quote for being a dog trainer. And I think that both of our journeys do highlight that. And that's the quote that comes to mind in terms of the question of what did I think of you then versus now? Kind of I think just like any trainer, we only know what we know at the time. And as we get new information, our approaches change, and our methods change, our management system changes, and layered on top of that, sort of the question of and I think you and my friendship, that friendship definitely highlighted my path more towards tolerance of other styles of training, because still you're definitely more aversive as a trainer than I am, which I don't use as too many people see that as a value judgment to say to someone or say about someone. And I use it all the time when I'm talking to, whether it's a coworker or an assistant that I'm talking to about methods, or at Catch, I brought it up all the time. You do use aversives quicker and more frequently in your training than I do, but that doesn't mean that you're not as good a trainer as me, and it doesn't mean you're a better trainer than me. And one thing that our friendship and what you've taught me has really helped is, and it's a belief I have about everyone as a trainer, I don't mind if you don't want to use a certain tool, that's okay. If a trainer is I would never give an owner an e-collar, for example. I don't think that's a good tool to give an owner, or that to me, I'm yeah, sure, that I can see that, right? I don't think it's fair to conflate that with, if you use an e-collar, you're being abusive, or an e-collar is an abusive tool. It can certainly be used that way, but it's just a tool. A wrench can be used to hit someone over the head with and kill them. That doesn't mean a wrench is always a murder weapon, right? And there's, I'm sure that if you're anti-e-collar, there's lots of logical fallacies you can pick apart with that statement, and I get that. But so in terms of like your second question, in terms of like how do I feel more about like the methods of stuff, something that's become central to my training is, again, I don't generally use it would be a very rare setup for me to use like the air pressure doggy,
the pet convincer,
or something like that, like compressed air canisters. I just don't use them a lot. There's other ways that I manage a dog through whatever is going on emotionally with them. Our approaches definitely look different in the beginning when they usually will get to the same place. But one thing that I've really come to value, that I really learned alongside and from you, from watching you train, and I think Trish King really highlighted for me earlier on in my career, is it is really important as a dog trainer, in my opinion, to be, whether or not you want to use suppression in training or whether or not you want to use aversives as part of your training plan, you should be able to have a discussion and outline what the risk is and why, and give a realistic explanation. Like, there are plenty of dogs I've worked with where someone was like, we use this air canister in this situation, and I've gone, okay, I don't object to that on the grounds of risk, but here is why I don't think that that's going to help us meet our goals long term for this situation with this dog. And there have also been dogs that someone was like, well, when they do this, I just yell at them. And I'm like, okay, well, here's why that could emotionally damage this dog. So I really think that's one thing I value from having learned, again, like alongside and from you, is the actual evaluation of the risk and using a certain tool or a certain approach on that dog's personality. Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful to be able to see that on a wide range of personalities, because one thing that was my belief when I came into the industry was, like, you hear from a lot of people about the risk of tools and the risk of using aversives. And that definitely gets conflated. The possibility often gets conflated with likelihood. And whether or not someone chooses to use a lot of aversives in their training plan, that's something that I think is important, is the ability to distinguish between the possibility of fallout, what is the possible fallout, and for that dog, what is the likely lesson they might learn that might make me say, maybe not this tool or maybe not this situation. And sometimes it comes down to, like, I don't actually think there's a high likelihood of fallout for this. I just would prefer to approach it this way. And if the owner is happy with the progress we're getting, we're going to keep moving forward on that trajectory. For my own practice, that's often what it comes down to, is it's less about the likelihood of risk and more about, like, well, here's an approach that's working. And yeah, that tool might get this behavior off the table quicker, but often for me, again, it comes down to the emotions over behavior. And so I'm much more concerned with giving the dog the emotional muscles to cope. And as long as the approach I'm using is working, that's the path I'll stay on. But thankfully, I have the knowledge to not have to stay on that path if I feel like I'm not helping the family. And I know how to evaluate the actual risk, the actual likelihood of risk. Which is important.
Sure. I mean, the big thing, I can see where I can come in that aversive spectrum, but to be fair, it's just like I'm only doing it when the dog's like really like up there in like intensity, right, or there's like reactivity, or just like something like that. I mean, especially with socials, with like the horse, with the horse whip, but like, one, I have to experiment to see what works with the owner, because it's really going to be dependent on what the owner is going to be comfortable using, right, and then just to help them, because later on is I want them to eventually not use the tool and just right, like, I want them to feel confident in themselves, and if the tool can help them be confident in themselves, then is then it's like win-win, it's just like,
Right.
because the owners just feel like they don't know what to do when
Right.
their dogs are doing this. So
Right. And I also will say that, like, right now I'm training for a company that isn't my company, right? So
mhm,
like I don't when I'm out there delivering a service, I'm not the one that's like sitting at the top of the tier going, this is what our systems look like, right? So that's also something I'm keeping in mind, because you did point out really astutely that unfortunately as a dog trainer, when you're out there training dogs, you are taking on a certain level of risk when you take certain approaches, that you're going to get some pushback that isn't necessarily always going to come from an educated place, and can come from, in fact, a very emotional and aggressive place. Like, people are all for not using aversives with dogs, but not so much on the people side. They'll use a lot of aversives in their arguments. And I think that that's something too that I always keep in mind in my training style, is like, even if I see a different avenue that maybe I could wiggle around that corner again a little quicker, that's not always the company I'm representing's like stance, right? And so I think that plays into it too. And that's, some trainers are able to find the middle ground there, some aren't. But I do live right now in an area where there's kind of a big divide between the like camps of trainers. And so that's something I always keep in mind too, is like, you're always representing the company before, but
sure.
one day be representing my own company.
Yeah. But so in short, just being around me just change your perspective on things.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's just,
yeah. I mean, it really changed my perspective on the risk, on what the actual, like I really got a much better, in fact, I had, while I was at Catch, I had one of your students with McLovin, the little Cavalier.
oh, the chocolate
and,
Cavalier.
I had a lot of discussions with her about, with Christine about that concept of like, okay, here, if you do this to this dog in this situation, here is the risks here are the potential risks, and here's the likelihood, knowing your dog's personality, like shadowing with you really let me have that educated conversation with someone, because I had seen, she was considering taking him to a trainer that was not going to be, it was a very high likelihood of risk. That was my evaluation. And so that's something I always would share with my students too when I was at Catch, is like learning about tools, even if you're not going to use them, learning about them and seeing them in use from another trainer. You don't ever have to touch them if you feel ethically uncomfortable, but it's important to be able to really see, like, there's a difference between, hey, I think there's a little more emotional fine tuning we could do to get this dog to be as successful as they can be, versus you can't use a tool with this dog or you'll cause drastic fallout. I think too often people conflate those. Like a dog that's anxious, they're like, oh, you're going to cause a huge issue if you use this tool. And I'm like, well, potentially, but you need to know more about the dog than just the fact he has anxiety to actually make an educated, So that's something I really value from my time with you, is being able to really dig into that. And it's important. It's important to be able to have those conversations as a dog trainer and not get emotional about them. Like, again, not being, it's so silly that some people would hear me go, yeah, my best friend Kevin he uses a lot more tools than me, and he does use aversives more quickly than I do. And that just that statement alone, people have a whole idea, like depending on what kind of trainer they are, they get a whole idea of either me as a trainer or you as a trainer. And it's so silly, it's just so.
Sure. Especially people can just Google me or just like look up my Facebook or just like
look at the dogs he's trained. Look at what their bodies are telling you. So it's interesting, but
yeah. It's fun. Listen, I miss you a lot. I miss you helping out with the socials. Like every time it's just like I guess helpers in and out, and you were like one of the good ones, and I'm like,
I cannot wait to come visit and get to go to some socials, and like I'll probably time my visit so I can do as many socials as I can. But yeah, I miss them a ton, and I miss you a ton. It's funny because we just talked for 2 hours after talking for what, like 45 minutes before we even got on this call. Like,
yeah.
So
That's how you know. That's how you know we're friends.
Yeah.
Like we'll talk even before we're scheduled to talk.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. I know when you called me and we talked on the phone for all that time, I was like, so classic, so classic of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So all right. So now, so like you said, so we're about to wrap up. But if people wanted to get were interested with your services, or your potential service dog program, like online, like I'm just reiterating, right? So like they would just have to send you out a friend request and message you, right? Or how else can they?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. Send me a friend request. If you do message me, what I'm going to tell you is I am not really taking on clients yet because I don't have the time. I have to put that time towards actually like making there be something to give you as a client. But I am hoping to be able to start enrolling people in. It'll be sort of like a tiered academy program is my idea, with different levels of access to me in terms of like talking weekly versus monthly, and then different like bonuses to different kinds of content, and then probably a support group. Facebook support group is sort of the bare bones sketch of what it's going to look like. If you're someone that wants help training your psychiatric service dog, if you're someone that wants to learn, like if you are a dog trainer that wants to learn more about psychiatric service dogs, friend request me and just keep an eye on my wall. When I start rolling out, there are like some conversations I really want to have that'll probably just be free. And then talking on some topics, some seminars I'd like to start running, that will all be announced on my Facebook. And I am in the process of finishing my logo. So as soon as I have my logo, I'm going to revamp my Facebook page and start getting that stuff up. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So, all right. I think to end it before we wrap up, name a goal that you would like to name, a big goal you want to achieve, like in 2021, or just something of that. Or who do you?
In 2021, like before the end of this year.
Maybe, or just name a big goal that you're shooting strive on.
The goal I'm really working towards is a wellness retreat that's like an animal retreat that has like all sorts of critters and different like meditation zones and different ways you can meditate. Like maybe we have some facility dogs you can take a walk with or teach a new trick, or I would say a smaller subset of that goal is once I launch the service dog stuff, the next thing I'm really excited to launch is it's going to be called The Art of Walking the Dog, I think. And it's going to be a course all about mindfulness when you're walking your dog, how to maintain mindfulness as you're walking your dog, because I can't meditate. Like normal meditation practices actually send me into a visceral panic attack. But I did find that I could be sort of meditative and mindful while I walked my dogs. So that's something I'm really excited to launch. And cool. My logo I'm really excited about. It'll be my little Evie that you all saw, her face.
All right, sweet. So yeah, so guys, we're gonna wrap up. Feel free to just ask questions or messages privately, like after this interview. This is gonna go on YouTube and it's gonna be on my Facebook. So feel free to share or just watch it. Hope you guys enjoy this, and we're gonna sign out, and we'll just we're gonna have probably another 30-minute conversation before we actually hang up ourselves. But hope you guys have a good Sunday, and thanks for watching.
Happy Sunday.
All right, bye guys.